figure out what the difficulty of classes are and what the content is. And perhaps most important of all, the content is meant to advance your career. It really is meant to accelerate your knowledge of manufacturing. Or perhaps you've been in the manufacturing industry for a long time and have a sense of how it works, but you're not able to figure out what the principles or the structure of what you're seeing in front of you is, and it's difficult to explain to others. Our hope is that after you've gone through the MicroMasters in manufacturing, you'll be able to do that, to show your colleagues or perhaps your employees what it is that they're seeing and how to make the manufacturing process, system, and company better. So, what are the principles of manufacturing, you might ask? They're all focused on flow and variation. One of the things that we realized about any system is that we're talking about two kinds of things, the flow and variation of physical things as well as information. And because of this change in the flow, how fast things go through the system, or how information processes through the system, we get these variations in the quality of the information and connect that to the physical flow. And so what we're trying to do is reduce that. And so we see flow, of course, in individual processes when we're talking about work in progress. We also see that in factories when we see the manufacturing lines interacting and seeing how we have transfer of product as well as information. And of course, outside of the factories, in the supply chains, when there's raw material coming into the factories and then finished product going out to the customers, there's a lot of, obviously, flow of material, but a lot of information as well. And because of all this flow, we also have to figure out how to organize manufacturing entities in a different way than other entities are organized, perhaps that are just purely service or financial entities, for example. And so these flow and variation concepts affect the quality, rate, cost, and flexibility of the manufacturing enterprise. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is increase that, the quality, better quality at a faster rate, but also at the same time reducing the cost and increasing the flexibility of the manufacturing enterprise. So let's talk about the structure of the MicroMasters program. As I've already mentioned, it's 8 classes, which represent the equivalent to 4 MIT classes here on campus. After learners pass those 8 classes, they receive a certificate of completion. Now, the way we designed these 8 courses is that the entry-level courses and their corresponding 2X courses may be taken in any order as long as the prerequisites are met. So all of you are probably taking the second part of management and engineering, and we are often asked, can I take the second part without taking the first? The answer is yes. It's we want to provide a lot of entry points into the MicroMasters because we realize there's you need a lot of flexibility. Most of you are working and need a little bit of you can't do everything at once. Okay, and as a result, we also realize that it's going to take some time to finish the program. There is no time limit to taking the program. However, of course, if you take more than one class at a time, you'll finish faster. We do offer 2 courses per session, if you will, and so depending on how many courses you take, usually a 1 and 2 version of different classes, you'll finish in between a year and a year and a half, or a little bit more. Now, in order to verify, each of the 2X courses, or the second half of the classes, has a proctored final exam, with the exception of this class where we have a case study, and I'll talk about that in the future. Now, the program cost is about $1,400, and if you sign up early, of course you get or at once, you get a 10% discount. Now, compare that to the cost of tuition here at MIT for 1 semester, as we'll see in a little bit. That's much less of an investment, but for the exact same quality and content that we have here on campus. Now, as I mentioned already, the MicroMasters is a pathway to a different master's degree. Those who finish the courses and get the MicroMasters credential are, again, able to apply to the master's program here at MIT, but they also are able to apply to other universities. But first, let me talk about our program in particular. Those students that apply to the Master of Engineering in Advanced Manufacturing and Design here have to go through the usual application process. And what that is, of course, the GRE for international students. It's also the TOEFL or the IELTS. And in addition, there's 3 recommendations and a usual application with 3 essays. If accepted to the program, then the MicroMasters counts as 1 semester's worth of academic credits. What that means is instead of this I'm sorry. You think I dropped the connection?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. Apologies for that. So I'll repeat the portion about applying to MIT in the Masters of Advanced Manufacturing and Design. The usual application process you still have to go through, which includes the GRE, and for international students, the TOEFL or IELTS, 3 recommendations, and the usual essays in a graduate application. If accepted, you save about a semester's worth of credit, or time, excuse me. And so instead of showing up in August, the MicroMasters students show up in January, and so that saves about 6 months, as well as 1 full tuition semester, and so that's about $25,000. Excuse me. So you can learn more about the structure of the program at that URL down there, manufacturing.mit.edu, or just Google Manufacturing MIT, and we're the first entry that comes up, I hope. Now, we also have partner universities. We'll talk about that later, but let's talk about this course in particular. As you already saw, most of the courses, including this one, are 8 weeks. And in the 8 weeks that we are going to be together, here's the structure of what you're going to be looking at. So the first is just an introduction of how to analyze cases. We realize many of you, actually most of you, haven't gone through a case-based class. And so we want to make sure you understand how to write a case analysis. We think that's very important. It's also good practice as you use these same skills in order to educate and explain what you're learning to your colleagues, because hopefully you're going to be putting into action right away what you're learning in these classes. Then we dive into leadership and culture, a very important topic, how to lead an engineering organization, and what it means to actively manage the culture and grow the culture of an organization. So introduce some very basic concepts that actually have been around for a long time here at MIT, developed by MIT colleagues. Then we talk a little bit about marketing and differentiation, emphasizing some points earlier from 1X, but again, you don't need to take the first half. And it's a case study to showcase what it means to differentiate a product and how to think about the strategic implications of that. Then we talk about production and distribution, and then we come back to culture and leadership with an emphasis on international service operations. Part of the reason we focus on that, and we come back to this concept of culture and leadership in the international context, is twofold. First, many of you are from outside the United States, but second, as the manufacturing industry has evolved, it's not just about products anymore. It's also about the connection of service to the customer. And that actually, the service component of many manufacturing companies has increased over the last few decades, and in some cases actually makes up a larger percentage of the revenue of a manufacturing company. And so we think that's very important. Then we talk about technology choices and business strategy. By the nature of manufacturing, you have to make trade-offs in the technology that you're adopting. And so one of the questions becomes, how do I make that choice, or how do I evaluate that choice? And then we bring everything together in the integration and course summary in the 7th week, but also giving you a little bit of time to start doing the practice for the final case study exam or proctored case analysis. Basic logistics of the course. The modules are released once a week, so we don't release everything at the same time. This is also an opportunity for you to make sure that you're focused on that week. Of course, if you joined us late, you have access to the previous weeks, but you have to complete them, and depending on the nature of how late you arrived, you'll talk to the TAs to see if there's any opportunity to make up some of the material, and especially if you're going to be doing verification. We have homework assignments for weeks 1 through 7, and these homework assignments are a little complex in that they have several different parts that are due at different times, because you're actually doing feedback with each other in the course. And so in order to emphasize the nature of collaboration in the manufacturing setting, we actually have tried to simulate some of that by giving you peer interaction and also time to reflect on the case studies. That's a significant and important part of the case study process, is reflecting on how this applies to your own context. We expect that the weekly time that you spend is going to be about 10 hours. For some of you, maybe a little bit more, some of you a little bit less, but that's what we try to aim for in the designing the course. And then mark this date on your calendars. We'll release the case study exam on March 3rd, and you will have 1 week to complete the exam. And so be sure to allow time during that week to do so. The grading is relatively straightforward. The weekly assignments make up 60% of the grade, and the final case study 30%. And as you go through the course, you'll notice there's these reading check questions, which are multiple choice for the most part. And they're just a way for us to make sure everybody's literally on the same page. And because the weekly assignments are so important, or such a large portion of the course, you can see that we believe actually doing the case analysis with each other is very important. In order to pass the course, you need to achieve 60% or higher. So it's we think actually that is a relatively generous passing grade, but we do assign letter grades. And one thing that we want to emphasize is that this is an academic exercise, meaning we abide by all the rules of MIT ethics and policy. And so we cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to take this seriously as a regular class here at MIT. And so because we have such a generous passing grade, we hope that there will be no issues with plagiarism or cheating of any kind. Now, what have learners told us about this course? Well, it's the feedback we have received is that it gives you a sense of how to think about the business aspects of engineering organizations, specifically the focus on manufacturing. And as the nature of manufacturing has changed over time, it's no longer enough to know the technical parts of being an engineer, but now we're collaborating with other disciplines. And so we have to also understand the business aspects of how to work in a team, how to manage an organization, and within the context of delivering value to the customer, it's also about product development, product design, and how we think about the value of differentiation, for example, in comparison to our competitors. And so it's being in manufacturing is no longer just about doing the equations or doing great prototypes or perhaps even designing products or processes. It's much more. And so people, the learners in the past have appreciated that we introduce them in a rigorous but gentle way, I think, into these concepts. Now, there's some frequently asked questions that we will address right now and then start taking your questions. One of the most often asked questions is, what are the requirements to pursue the manufacturing master's degree here on campus? As I've already mentioned, it's a regular application process. But the important part is that we see your grades in the MicroMasters as evidence of your proficiency in being able to succeed here at MIT. And so think of this as another graduate level set of classes that you can add as a transcript, because we do receive the transcripts. And so if perhaps you were not sure you could do the work and you do well, or you're considering maybe doing a master's, applying for a master's, here's a great opportunity to show us that you can do it. And it also, we take into account seriously your performance in this MicroMasters. So perhaps you might have struggled in the past a little bit, and but now here's an opportunity to show us that, through your experience, through your work experience, and now academic experience, you would be able to succeed. Of course, the application or reference letters are also very important, and ideally we would like to see one of those letters at least from an academic institution, meaning your undergraduate institution, or perhaps if you already have taken some graduate courses in another university, from one of those. People that have interacted with you in person and know the quality of your work. And then at least one from the place that you're working in now, and the other is up to you. We can take more than 3, but we only look at 3, so just send us your best 3. I already mentioned the GRE and the TOEFL. Okay. So we are constantly looking for new partner or pathway schools, as we call them, that can take the MicroMasters credential and award credit for that. At this point, we don't have any institution in Europe, but we have several in Asia and in Latin America. And so we're always looking to add new pathway schools. And so check back with us. But if you're in Europe, unfortunately, we don't have any right now. So the next question is, what type of job will be best suited for after doing the Principles of Manufacturing? Well, most of the people that are going through the program and also are graduates of the master's here on campus end up being initially manufacturing engineers. But because of the knowledge that they have acquired through these courses, they tend to move faster in their career path after having finished both the MicroMasters and the master's degree at MIT. And so they then become manufacturing engineer managers, or in some case, design engineers, supply chain engineers, and in a few cases, they do go into consulting, specifically consulting usually around engineering, but also in management. And I do also know of a couple folks that have gone into the finance side now that they understand how a manufacturing company works, and they're able to work better with the financing aspect of the capital equipment purchases and just the capitalization of a manufacturing company. So is the MicroMasters equivalent to a master's degree? It's no, in short. It's equivalent to one semester of the master's degree, but we wanted to have a way to recognize that even one semester, especially in the Principles of Manufacturing, has a significant amount of value that can accelerate your career. And so, no, it's not a master's degree, and we make that we try to make that very clear, and also encourage you to note the MicroMasters as part of the MITx platform or edX platform in your resume. We found that in itself, not just having a master's degree, but the MicroMasters credential is a differentiator in the marketplace. Do I have a chance of getting accepted into a master's program if I have a low undergraduate GPA? It depends. But the answer is, yeah, you could be. And the reason it depends is we look at the whole application. And depending on the reasons for your low GPA, the admissions committee will look at that and see if there's any mitigating circumstances. But if you're doing the MicroMasters and you're doing really well, then yeah, that will help in mitigating the issue of low undergraduate GPA. The other important aspect of this is that the MicroMasters also gives you a sense of what it's like to be here on campus a little bit with the kinds of content that we provide and the professors. You get a sense of how they teach. And so it also gives you an opportunity to see if you would fit in or feel like you would fit in at MIT. But we would encourage you to apply even if you're not quite 100% sure. And even if you never thought you could come to MIT, we would encourage you to apply. It's, again, we look at the whole application and the whole person. Additional resources that you can use, well, obviously, to look at the syllabus on the course website, but also, as you see here in this URL, more information about the rest of the classes as well as the overall structure of the program at micromasters.mit.edu/POM for Principles of Manufacturing. And our team is always ready to answer questions. You have their email right there. And of course, that email address is mostly for questions about this particular course, but if you have other questions, also feel free to include them there. So that was a very quick and hopefully thorough introduction to both the MicroMasters and this course. And I would be very happy to take questions right now. My colleagues, Emily and Aditi, are here, and so they've been monitoring the chat, and they'll tell me what the questions are. And maybe if you, Aditi and Emily, if you can tell me 2 or 3 questions, and I'll try to answer them. Let me mute here for a second so that we don't have any feedback.
Okay, well, we have one question already. What if I already have a master's in industrial engineering and I'm Canadian? Would I still be required to provide undergraduate transcripts and the GRE and TOEFL?
All right, so interesting question. The answer is yes. You're required to provide the undergraduate. Actually, the application says you're required to provide the transcripts of all the universities you've attended. But if you already have a master's degree in industrial engineering, your undergraduate degree is probably less important to the admissions committee than your master's degree. And so sometimes the question is asked in part because you have a less than stellar record perhaps as an undergraduate, but then you made it up as a master's candidate or when you did your master's degree. That's actually, we see that often, and that's wonderful. We actually love to see improvement And that's also part of the reason that we offer this MicroMasters, again, to provide a different opportunity for people to be able to apply and show that they're capable of MIT quality work. So,
and just to be clear, they wouldn't have to submit the TOEFL because they are an English native speaker?
Sure.
Right. Let's see what other questions we have. Is there a plan to release any other manufacturing courses on edX? And how many students from MicroMasters are admitted to the residential program?
So the question is, are we releasing more courses? At this point, with the MicroMasters, with the official courses, we don't anticipate releasing anything in the next coming year. However, we are constantly working to update the courses or provide kind of additional content modules. For example, we're often asked about specifically Industry 4.0. So we've been designing and working on a small modulette, let's call it, something additional content that you can use. And as we find more or get more requests, we'll try to do more of that. And we're also modifying the courses as we go along, as both the nature of the manufacturing industry changes, and we see the feedback as well from the students and demographics. We might tweak one thing or another. So slightly different course each time. The second part of the question was?
How many students?
Oh, how many students do we admit? We don't have a quota, actually. So we have 2 students that are showing up, actually have shown up here on campus as our first 2 MicroMasters blended students. And we're now going through the admissions process for this cohort, and I don't have a number. The master's degree here on campus is anywhere from 15 to 20 students on a yearly basis. So I would imagine we would maybe double that at some point, probably in this year. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but I would estimate we'll settle around 15 to 20. But again, we don't have a quota and we don't have a maximum per se. So if we find that there's 30 really well qualified candidates, they're part of the pool, the applicant pool, and so we'll accept them, obviously. So it entirely depends on how many apply and their qualifications and as part of the larger pool. I think the only thing we'd have to think about is, as we get larger, the fit or the size of the classes that we have. We do try to maintain a relatively personal experience here on campus, and most of the MIT classes are anywhere between 15 and at most, and this is unusual, but most would be about 60, with most being about 15 to 30 students. And so if we get much, much larger, that would be something we'd have to think about. But again, no quotas.
All right. Our next 2 questions. Will the Industry 4.0 module be released in this session, or when do you anticipate it releasing? And then there's also the question of, is there a way to receive a lowered course fee, and that is the edX financial aid that we could talk about a little bit.
Yes, actually, Emily, financial aid, and then I'll talk about this.
Sure. For those who aren't aware, edX does offer financial aid to people taking courses on the edX platform. You can go to just search financial aid in the edX help area, and it's an application that you can apply for at any time before the verified deadline for the course. And if it is accepted, you will receive a 90% discount for the course fee. So we encourage anyone who has concerns about the money to apply to the edX financial aid.
All right, and then the 4.0 module, will it be released? I think so. We actually recorded it just last month, and so it's in editing right now, and I imagine we'll make that announcement soon, but certainly by the end of the semester for sure. And soon, I would say in the next few weeks. I'm looking to my colleagues, and I think it's possible.
All right, one more question. Is the MicroMaster intended for general engineering or aimed towards specific sections of engineering?
Okay, so specifically it's aimed at any engineer that's working in an organization that is making stuff, so manufacturing. And it's not just making some stuff, it's about making lots of stuff. So mass production, things, or industries or companies where the rate matters, where the cost matters. It's not just about making a prototype where it's just one or a few or even 30, 40. It's about making lots of them. It's where making them at a price that is competitive in the market is important, and where the organization has to be flexible in its product mix. And then lastly, where obviously quality matters a lot because you're producing a lot of things and you want that those products come back, because it affects both the reputation and, as importantly, the finances of the company. So it's aimed, so whether you're in the pharmaceutical industry or the automotive industry, synthetic biology industry now, and anywhere where you're making things, aerospace, we've actually had folks from the railroad industry. So it's really about thinking, a way of thinking about the process and processes of making things, and how do you make improvements on them. And again, control the variation of the material going through the processes, and also connecting that with information so that you reduce that variation and produce high quality at a reasonable cost and lots at the same time. And hopefully, and as we'll talk in this module, it's more ecologically sustainable. That's obviously an important topic that we're aware of, and something that we think the manufacturing industry is also picking up on more and more.
All right. We'll give you all a minute or two, and if you have any additional questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will answer them. Okay, the question is the MIT professional education course on Industry 4.0 related to MicroMasters?
Is it related? And the simple answer is no. Now, that being said, that is, it does not count for the MicroMasters. And however, that course is actually was designed and created by my colleague, John Hart, who is one of our manufacturing colleagues here. And so a lot of the things that you will hear in that course, very specific to the additive manufacturing sector, are actually things that you'll hear in more general terms in this MicroMasters. And so, again, he'll talk about the specifics of the technology and how it's used, but we'll talk about the principles that he's using in a more general or broader context. I do highly recommend it, though. It is not a course for credit in the sense that you don't get academic credit for it. It's the shorter, more condensed course aimed as an introduction to the theme. And again, because of the nature of professional education, also I believe has a significantly higher cost. I highly recommend it.
All right. Well, unless there are any other questions, I think we're all done.
Great. Well, again, thank you for being with us today. Hope you're enjoying this module, this half module of Management and Engineering, and we look forward to seeing your participation. And if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email, and we'll see you in the course. Bye.